Well, I've already covered the Russian Army and Air Force's MI helicopters, at least as many as I could find in 1/72 scale diecast. But what about the Russian Navy? Hi, Misha here, and yeah, another history blathering with a diecast model. And this is the Kamov KA-25. NATO reporting name of Hormone. Yeah, not as cool as Hind. And NATO did tend to give Soviet-era helicopters, and even helicopters today, H code names. And this was an anti-submarine search and rescue, reconnaissance, and just kind of a multi-role helicopter developed specifically for Russia's surface fleet. And just because it's on the table, here's kind of its counterpart. This is the American SH-2 Sea Sprite by Kamov. It was also an anti-submarine chopper and also in service at the same time. But that's for another video. This model, by the way, is 172 from Altaya, which I prefer, but they don't do a KA-25, so I went with a Americum, and this actually is one of the neater Americums. They did a pretty solid job with this one. Sort of. This is actually my second model. The first one had an incident I'll tell at the end of the video. Partially my fault. In the 1950s, as Russia was expanding its surface fleet, and as the U.S. was using more and more nuclear-powered ballistic submarines, Russia found that it needed an anti-submarine helicopter, one that could detect enemy subs and then, if necessary, attack them. Well, the Moscow Design Bureau, led by Mishaco, really did focus mostly on land-based helicopters, and therefore it kind of left the door open for Kamov and his design bureau to take over the needs of the Navy. So they designed this helicopter specifically for them, and they were chosen in 1958 to proceed and come up with something. Around 1960, they showed the KA-20, which was more of a design concept prototype. It was a functioning aircraft, but it didn't have mission equipment, mission gear on board. It was just, it wasn't navalized, it wasn't made proof against salt water. But it did kind of prove this interesting rotor system that Kamov would go with. As you see, it has two sets of rotors, two sets of blades. It's called a coaxial, and it's contra-rotating. And this was done for a couple of reasons. Mainly, it was to save room. It allowed the helicopter to be smaller while still being powerful enough and having enough endurance and range. Because these had to not only operate off the landing pads of Soviet surface vessels. Remember, they didn't have supercarriers like America. But also they had to be able to fit on the elevators and, be stored under decks and whatnot. It also let the plane be more aerobatic. I said planing in, I apologize. The aircraft to be more aerobatic. And it also meant the tail rotor could be dispensed with, meaning that the transmission and whatnot was a smaller target, more compact, more readily accessible. In all, it was just an interesting design and a different way of doing things. And this would be kind of a design feature of Kamov helicopters for, well, half a century. So with that in mind, with the KA-20 being shown off as a proof of concept, they worked on the KA-25. And it first flew in 1963 and then was put into full rate production in 1965. And it actually took a little time to go into full Navy service and be used in the ocean. But by 1972, it was being deployed on board surface ships. So what do we have? Well, it's a twin turbine engine helicopter. Very short, only 32 feet long. Of course, it is 17.5 feet tall thanks to the axis. Relatively large. Has a standard crew of 4. It can carry up to 12 passengers. Relatively, I wouldn't say fast, but it got the job done. It was about 120 miles per hour. Interestingly, it had a pretty low ceiling of under 11,000 feet. But again, it did not need to go high. It was a naval aircraft. And it could carry over 4,000 pounds in disposable ordnance or stores. These could include a dipping sonar. It could also carry torpedoes or depth charges, both conventional, explosive, and actually it could carry nuclear armed depth charges if the need were ever there, which thankfully it never was. That was, of course, its anti-submarine. There was a version known as the KA-25PS, which was a dedicated sea rescue, search and rescue variant. There was also the KA-25K, which was a civilian variant that Aeroflot was interested in, and a few other versions besides. But the main one is what you see here. Production went in 1977 with about 460 examples built, many of which are still in it's late, Russian service today, even after the fall of the Soviet Union. And it has proven to be a very acceptable aircraft. Not a whole lot to be said about it. I think you get the idea. One neat feature, or feature set really it had, was all the things that Kamov did to protect it or make sure it was still safe in the ocean against seawater. For example, it had a alcohol-based de-icing system, and I'm sure no one ever tried to drink that. Yes, I know, a different type of alcohol, but the question is, do all the sailors know? The Russian Navy was kind of a rough place in the 90s. I digress. The rotor blades are actually filled with nitrogen and pressurized. This was so they could easily detect cracking through nitrogen leaks. Very good. It used hydraulics specifically designed for the water. It has landing gears, you see, wheels. They also had inflatable flotation balloons, essentially. So if it needed to land in the water, it could ditch there. and so on and so forth. Again, like I said, this wasn't just a regular helicopter that was kind of retroactively made into a naval one. No. This was purpose built, and it shows. So, why is this my second model? Well, when I first got it, of course, when you get them, you have to pop the rotors on, and sometimes they can be rather stiff. So I set it on the table and started popping them on. Not really thinking or realizing that the little, very thin struts that hold the wheels are just that thin. And yeah, I snapped one off. Now, it wasn't broken so much that it couldn't have been glued back. And actually, I tried that. But the thing is, it connects in 5 points. And trying to glue back something that connects in 5 points, I got it back on, but it was just kind of higgledy-piggledy. I wasn't happy with it. I'm kind of a perfectionist like that. And since these are cheap, like I think this was $15, I said, you know what, instead of wasting more time trying to do it, I'll just grab another one. So I did that. That's my only thing about Mercom. The models aren't bad on the detail or even paint level, but their plastic, as I've said in other videos, is just a little fragile, a little too stiff. The models like this from Altaya, while built on the same basic tooling, they just seem a little more durable. Also, their rotors stay on better. Now, these rotors seem to be pretty good on this one, but some of my other ones I ended up having to glue or blue tack on. So I typically don't buy a Mercom unless it's the only choice. But again, I think for them, this is definitely one of their better models and a unique helicopter for sure. But yeah, I have a few other videos covering the mill designs. And I'd like to find a KA-50 or KA-52 alligator one day. But no one seems to do those right now in diecast 172. I found some plastic models, but no diecast. Anyway, guys, I appreciate you tuning in. If you could, like, share, and subscribe, and feel free to post below if you have any comments or questions. I'm going to call it a night. I appreciate you, like I said. This is Misha, and I'll catch you very soon next time.